What's up, everybody? Welcome to the State of Wild, episode 97, a regular YouTube video web series podcast thingy. My name's Meowth, and as usual, I'm joined by my two good friends and co-hosts, Roffle and Corbett. How are you guys doing tonight?
You know what? I'm doing all right. We were here last week, but the episode wasn't. It turns out that some of the things we recorded quickly became irrelevant for reasons that we'll talk about today. So it's good to be hopefully back in your subscription feeds and talking about some Hearthstone.
Yeah, we have some the lost State of Wild tapes. You know, maybe we can release this in the future as a Netflix special. I'm sure something. All the fans are really looking forward to that one. But no, really happy to be here talking with you guys. Feeling a lot more, a lot more positive, I suppose. Not like you guys heard last week, but let's just say it was a little bit of a downer. And hopefully this week's gonna be a lot more fun and upbeat.
Yeah, we recorded, and due to some personal reasons for me, we weren't going to get the episode out until like late Wednesday. And then it turns out, like, as I was editing, we got news that there was a balance patch coming that was going to address all the things that we talked about, and so we decided to just not post it like they said. And that reason is we got a huge balance patch announced Wednesday afternoon and dropping Thursday, with 13 balance patches to standard and wild cards here. And so let's just dive on into it. I'm just going to run through all of the cards that got changed, and then we'll kind of come back and talk about them one by one. So the first one, Shield Shatter, was a 10 mana spell that said deal 5 damage to all minions, cost 1 less for each armor you have. It never cost 10 mana, it always costs 0. And that has been changed now to be a 0 mana deal 4 to all minions. Tidal Revenants, this was a card when we were reviewing, it kind of just been dismissed as an arena card. Turns out it was kind of busted in standard. It used to be an 8 mana 5/8 elemental that dealt 5 and gained you 8 armor. It now is an 8 mana 5/8 that deals 5, gains 5. Nelly and her pirate ship have been kind of decimated, I'll say here. So Nelly's pirate ship used to add 3 pirates to your hand that cost 1. They now add 3 pirates to your hand that cost 1 less. Pretty significant nerf to that. From the Depths, so this is the one that reduced the bottom 5 cards of your deck by 3, and then dredged 1 to the top. Used to cost 3 mana, now cost 4. So those were all warrior cards that got changed because standard control warrior was kind of gross. And then they nerfed standard Demon Hunter yet again. So Carry Fell Soul was a 6 mana 6/6 that transformed into a 6/6 copy of a demon in your deck. It is now a 7 mana 7/7 that transforms into a 7/7 copy. So that people weren't playing it as the big Demon Hunter thing that they were supposed to be. They were playing it as Barnes. And then Battle-Worn Vanguard, a card that's been kind of busted for a while, finally got touched here. Was a 2 mana 2/2. After a hero attack, summon 2 1/1 Fell Wings. It is now a 2 mana 2/1 that does the same. And then getting into some individual card changes. They wanted to... The dev comment here was they wanted to hit cards that... felt really bad to play against, but weren't necessarily power concerns. And so, one of those was Wildpaw Knoll. We were very surprised, I think, that it got completely reverted back to a 5 mana 4/5. And turns out, might have been a mistake. It is now a 5 mana 3/5 with Rush that costs 1 less for each card that you've added to your hand from another class. Lightforged Carriol, finally getting the axe from 7 mana to 8. Pretty significant nerf there. Spite Lash Siren, so Naga Mage in standard. It used to be a 4 mana 2/5. Naga Spell, refresh 2 mana crystals for each. 5 mana 2/6. And now we're getting into a couple of wild changes that are also going to affect wild. Earthen Scales was the first one, going from 1 mana to 2. Lightning Bloom, going from a 0 mana gain 2 mana crystals overload 2 to a 0 mana refresh 2 mana crystals overload 2. So pretty huge nerf here. Probably the thing that we're going to spend the most time talking about today. We do have 2 other changes here. Mr. Smite, going from a 6 mana 6/5 to a 7 mana 6/5. And then School Teacher. So School Teacher is the card that added a 1/1 Noggling to your hand. That, you got to discover a 3 mana spell and teach that to the Noggling. It is now a 4 mana 4/3 instead of a 4 mana 5/4. So I've been talking forever because that is a bunch of changes. And so I think just we can talk about them kind of collectively. All the warrior changes aimed at standard Control Warrior. None of them really affect Wild, except kind of guarantee that like From the Depths, Dead Man's Hand Warrior might not be a thing anymore. I don't know. It's honestly still might be playable at 4 mana.
I played it today at 4 mana, but I played it in a deck that was not good, so I lost my sanity for other reasons. From the Depths was the best card in that deck, but that that doesn't say much. No, I think that like these are cards that were powerful in Wild but not broken, so they were playable. Like Shield Shatter was probably run in that same Dead Man's Hand Warrior. People were goofing around with Even Warrior just to run the Tidal Revenant. Even Nelly was maybe a legitimate consideration in Odd Warrior, as was From the Depths. So like niche decks did get hit by this, and these are very powerful cards, but these are all some that, especially in Shield Shatter, and From the Depths, I could see some consideration for an unnerf in the future, just because there is some, like they existed long enough to, have some memory attached to them, right? So nobody's going to really remember the 2 weeks that Tidal Revenant gained 8 armor. And I don't know that Nelly was necessarily all that healthy with the From the Depths interaction, so it's like a pick one of those two. So yeah, these were aimed at standard, but like a little bit of collateral damage in Wild, just because like they were strong enough. They were so strong in standard that they are, playable Wild cards, and now they're probably just a step too slow in most of these cases.
Yeah, for sure. Like Shatter's definitely the type of card that can push a Wild archetype eventually by itself. Like whenever the inevitable Control Warrior dream eventually actually comes true. But now it's kind of not really much of a thing anymore. So let's just take away that last little bit of hope that the Control Warrior fans has had.
What little hope? Speaking of little hope, the little hope the Demon Hunter had, right? It's constantly getting hit by these standard nerfs, which feels really bad. So in standard, Carry a Fell Soul had turned into like a Barnes Yasharj kind of situation where you were using it to summon the one of Zilog in your deck, instead of playing it as like big Demon Hunter, which I think is the point of Carry a Fell Soul. And so that's just like Roffle mentioned, another nerf to some fringe archetypes and synergies. And then Battle-Worn Vanguard, so this was like a really strong card. I'm surprised it didn't get hit earlier, but it is getting hit now, which kind of sucks. Demon Hunter's already struggling. Kind of sucks to see 2 more hits to the class.
Yeah, especially in like Battle-Worn Vanguard was one of the cards making like an aggro Demon Hunter worth playing. And so the combination of Drekthar and this now, it's just like that archetype's kind of not really worth running anymore until it gets some more support. And Carrier was even just too slow in Wild at 6 mana. Now it's gonna be way too slow. So it's a bit of a bummer for the class that doesn't really have much going for it right now in the format.
I will say though, I am generally more hopeful for Demon Hunter than I was probably prior to this expansion. Like we did get to the aggro DH. It looked very, very real in Wild before the Drekthar change, and even like the current iteration post Drekthar, I thought had, it wasn't great, but I thought it was like somewhat competitive, and it kind of gave a little bit of hope for the future that just because Demon Hunter's lagging behind in number of cards and everything, we might eventually start seeing that class kind of catch up to some of the others.
Yeah, maybe some more unnerf candidates in the future to help the class out here. All right, so let's move over to Wildpaw Knoll. So this is was seeing primarily play in Mine Rogue. It was being seen as like an anti-aggro package in the Mine Combo Rogue and Wild. I don't know how much of a difference going from 4 to 3 is when it comes to health breakpoints of important minions. But that being said, I didn't play a ton of Mine Rogue, so I don't know if you guys have, more informed opinions about Knoll's impact.
I think the bigger deal in Mine Rogue specifically is less chip damage, which could be relevant for popping off earlier, especially in Standard. That said, the mana cost for the first round of the nerf was a bigger hit than I think the attack. So you're still able to get it down pretty early, essentially on curve with like a Shroud of Concealment that is played on curve if you haven't played any other rogue spells. So I I was goofing around with it both before and after the nerf in Secret Rogue, which actually gained a little bit of popularity in its ability to deal with Big Shaman in particular. But there's also this really cute interaction with Sonya and Wild Pot Knoll where you essentially clear infinite boards if your APM is fast enough, which turns out mine is not. But like there's there's something to that in general, and with the mana cost back, like I think you can kind of just squeeze that into some rogue decks now and have a little bit of fun with it. If you're not running too many minions, I think it's worth considering. But I don't know. I haven't played Mine Rogue since the change to Knoll, but I imagine it's I don't think it actually like changes the breakpoints, right? Because you just need to hit them for 2 so that they get to 28, and 3 is greater than 2, so you're still just kind of fine, right? And so I don't think it's a huge issue there unless you happen to be playing against a warrior, which is kind of trash right now, and it doesn't really make that big. Like maybe it makes a difference into druid, but you're hoping to like get underneath their armor gain anyway.
Yeah, I mean, 3 is the real critical breakpoint in Wild, obviously, right? Like ships cannons. A lot of the early game minions all just end up having 3 health for some reason. Like it's just the way it is. And then, like Roffle said, the breakpoints don't actually matter that much, really, because like the like Necrogram damage with the graveyard up is 16. The mine getting popped is another 8, so that's 24. So you just need like Necrogram to hit phase twice or just once with a knoll, and that's 30 damage. Right, so like it doesn't really change anything that much. Of course, there are going to be fringe times, right? Like where it matters clearing an injured marauder or something. But I mean, I think this is very minor, so it's like whatever. No pun intended.
All right, so let's move on to Lightforged Cariel then. And this is a card that we kind of expected was going to get nerfed eventually because this was like such a powerful card even in Wild that you were shoving it in aggro decks because like it was that good. And so how impactful do you guys think the nerf is moving Cariel from 7 to 8?
It's very impactful, especially when you consider aggro decks, right?
Yeah.
Like for an aggro deck, the repetitive 2 damage to face for free after you got her down was, a relevant part of why you could afford to run a 7 mana card in your deck. I don't know. I was surprised to hear that this was a feels decision rather than a power level decision because like this is a card that's carrying archetypes in the Wild format. Like this card is a big part of why Reno Paladin grew to prominence and was like the premier Reno deck in the format. And like you said, you're shoving it into Tax Paladin or these really aggressive low to the ground decks that would never dream of running a 7 mana card in the future. That said, maybe still worth running. It's an even cost card now. You could run it in even Paladin as well if you really wanted to. But yeah, I think I'm happy to see this because there are like a lot of games where she would come down and just like it kind of felt like another Snowfall Guardian type thing where she would come out and just completely stall you out or clear your board completely. It's a little bit slower with like an equality play as well. So I'm happy to see this because Cariel is a cool card, but she was maybe a little bit too powerful.
Yeah, I do want to circle back to the field stuff at some point, but I will say about Cariel, it's still like the best card in Holy Paladin. Like I already looked at the stuff. It's still like the best card. So it's not like a Scabs change, right? Where the Scabs is in a very similar situation where it went from 7 to 8 as a hero, and it went from like, hey, it's one of the strongest cards in the deck to kind of like fringe, like in standard, like not really that playable and things like Thief Rogue. It barely makes it kind of into the list. Whereas Cariel, just like the 1 mana nerf, it's sort of just bounced right off. As for Wild, it's probably affecting Wild decks a little bit more, just because Roffle, like Roffle was talking about, 8 mana's a lot. And it already wasn't good enough, I think, in Mech Paladin. That had been tried, it didn't look amazing there, and so I don't really foresee it being played in like aggro attacks or mechs in the future. But I'm sure it'll still be a really good card in Reno Paladin, Big Paladin, all those kind of archetypes as well. So
yeah, a little bit sad to see her unnerved, but honestly, kind of deserved.
No.
No, Hey man, somebody's got to stand paladin on this podcast.
know.
Okay.
Paladin apologist over here. Like, you take it a little too far.
I
A
don't
little
think
too
so.
far.
No.
We need Gariel at 8.
All right. Next up, Smite Lash Siren. Naga Mage didn't really see a ton of play in Wild, so I don't think this is really something we want to talk about too much here.
I will say that this, like, with absolute certainty means we will probably never see Naga Mage in Wild, because like an extra turn is a real big deal.
Yeah. Until it gets
sad,
reverted. Yeah.
A wild Naga Mage would have been like, ooh, like that would have been a deck that I think would have been right up my alley. But sadly, it's pretty dead. I think.
All right. Earthen Scales going from 1 to 2. So obviously this affects specifically Linecracker Druid in our format. I have seen some comments that is a buff to Linecracker Druid because it now no longer gets hit by Geist. I don't know if I completely agree with that. It does like technically slow down Linecracker Druid combo by a little bit, but we're talking about a deck that runs Twig, Sphere, Guff, so not consistently slowing down the deck. But I do think that it is a relevant hit to Linecracker Druid.
Yeah, no, this is a nerf. The card costs more, and no sane person is putting Geist in their deck, first of all, and second of all, putting Geist in their deck with the intention of beating Linecracker Druid, because like even when Linecracker Druid was the best Druid, it was still like the least popular Druid. So what is the purpose of teching against it? I think it like the thing that it does is it like potentially, mana doesn't really mean that much to Druid, but like this is 2 mana on a given turn on your combo turn, so it's like it increases the requirement for your combo, and when you lose some of your temporary ramp for in the deck, which we'll get to in a moment, it slows it down. So probably makes the Linecracker decks quite a bit worse. It might even get them into an awkward spot where they can't play the second one. But also 1200 armor is probably enough to lock out the game regardless. So, how often do you actually play out the Linecracker Druid mirror, whether or not they get both Earthen Scales? Because, 1200 armor is effective lethal just as much as 2500 is in most cases. So, it slows it down in some cases, and that's maybe a good thing because it's kind of a gross combo.
Roffle. You're mistaken. The logic there is saying that no sane person would play Geist, and you're right. But we play Wild, and enough people play Geist in their decks. I think it kind of mitigates the nerf just this like tiny little bit. We saw in the previous meta at Alterac Valley, Geist was up to like 5 to 10% play rate. Like it was seeing a pretty decent amount of Shaman. Even like right now, Geist still sees play in like 3 to 4% of decks, and while that is like minuscule, it does turn those matchups into like brutal 0% kind of counters to something that's a lot more normal for like a ramp druid or a combo druid into those sort of decks. So I think it mitigates it a little bit, but I do agree with you overall that it is like a nerf.
Even in those cases, like that was because people were under the impression that Skulking Geist beat Questline Hunter. So like that was a very popular deck, and like they had a reason for it, or that was their rationale for playing it, where like Linecracker Druid is a very, very small percentage compared to what Questline Hunter was.
The thing is, though, I think people will always play Geist, like at least a little bit. It'll definitely like fluctuate in and out, but there will always be a subset of the population that right now thinks, you know what, I'm gonna beat Quest Mage with this thing. I'm gonna, I'm gonna beat whatever Quest Hunter. I don't know. I don't think it makes sense either. But people keep playing this card, and I do think it matters a little bit. The fact that you don't just auto lose your win condition to this like 3% of the population that refuses to not play the freaking 6-mana 4/6.
As somebody who plays Geist in their Shaman decks, we're gonna move on here. Let's talk about School Teacher. We'll wrap around to the Smite and Bloom here to wrap things up, because we're probably gonna spend the most time on those. School Teacher, 4 mana 4/3 instead of a 4 mana 5/4. Basically, this was just like this effect is really popular, really strong, should not have premium stats. That was the reasoning behind it. Yeah,
I'm sad about this change.
I think it's a really cool card, and I am a little bit sad to see it get nerfed.
And I think we're just starting to see people catch on to, like, in the Wild player base at least, that they were like, oh wait, this is actually a pretty good card, because we talk about like spell pools in Wild and how broad they are, but when you narrow it down to something like less than 3 mana, in some classes it's a little bit more predictable, to where like if you're running a Naga package in a Reno deck, for instance, like maybe it makes sense. It's especially Mage. Like I was seeing it pop up more and more, and now it's gonna be a lot harder to like make the cut.
It's bad. Like it'll see playing like standard Naga Priest, I think, and it'll get cut everywhere else. I really would have liked to see this as a 4/4 because I thought it was a really interesting card, and I think that would have been fine. Like it wouldn't have been too strong. So bit bummed about this one. Maybe they'll buff it.
Yeah,
Maybe they'll buff it if the next chance they get. I don't know.
maybe. I think it was just kind of the Azure Drake problem, where it was popping up in just about every deck, even
Yeah.
decks that aren't necessarily like Naga
Well,
specific or.
Well, they buffed Azure Drake, so
Yeah.
you know.
All right, let's talk about Smite here. First of all, final nail in the coffin in Pirate Warrior. By the way, it's like been hit 4 or 5 different times, but Pirate Rogue technically getting knocked down a bit here, right? Smite going from 6 to 7, very relevant for aggro decks. So I do want to read the dev comments here on Smite and Bloom. So Smite was a powerful game-ending card that didn't need to be quite as powerful as he is on curve. This change will hopefully make the card a little bit more tolerable in the mid-game, while also slowing down the various combos he is involved with. So yeah, 6 to 7 is relevant in Pirate Rogue. I don't know if, Corb, you got the what are the early stats looking like on Smite and Pirate Rogue?
I'm shocked. It looks really good still. Like I thought it was gonna be terrible. Like I was like the logic of it made no sense. You know, like that's such a huge jump. But it still seems really solid so far. We're still like waiting to see. Like it is very early days kind of thing. But right now it kind of looks like a card that you just keep playing, which yeah, really surprises me.
I think the dev comment like really hit the nail on the head for what was being abused by the card previously, and just like slamming it down on curve and like deal with it. Otherwise, like there's no downside to playing the card is the reality of it. It's 6 mana, 6 to face. And so like he has a decent enough health total where you could protect him if you needed to, or just say, hey, you know what, like remove this or lose. And that's the kind of card that an aggro deck wants. You bump that mana cost up a little bit and it feels a little bit worse. Where I could still very easily see this performing is just like as a simple finisher. You get your opponent to like 6 or 8, they're about to stabilize. This has happened to me countless times against Pirate Rogue, where I'm like a turn away from stabilizing, and then bam, smite, and maybe like a fillet fighter or something, and I'm dead. Well, that play's still available to you. It's just a turn later, or maybe you don't have quite as much burst, but you don't always need like the double pirate alongside it. So if you have that fillet fighter in hand, you can still get the reach that you need from the card. So yeah, I could very easily still see this being a good card, because like the possibility to play it on curve is always there, but like how often is it really played on curve? And by the time it is being played, it's often one, maybe two other cards left in hand anyway, so you don't have the resources to get the full mana's worth of pirates onto the board anyway. So yeah, I mean, I could still see this being a good card, and I could like many games end for Pirate Rogue before Mr. Smite is even like a consideration anyway. So like the deck's still good.
Yeah, the like previously Smite was like the second best card in the deck, it looked like, behind Swordfish, like that we know pretty definitively. Like it was super strong. And it's not that, but that doesn't mean it's not like getting cut necessarily. Like it's still I think it's still a very important finisher just in those slower matchups in against like the old Reno deck that you see, or like I don't know, anything that's like slightly grindier. Just having that level of burst in the late game is a really huge deal for a deck that doesn't really have access to anything similar. So yeah, I don't know. Again, still really surprised. Like I thought that would have been a nail in the coffin for the card, but apparently not.
Even if you think about like a deck like Questline Hunter, right? Like they're gonna spend all of their turns early on removing your stuff, probably not whittling away your health total too much. So like turns, you could foresee situations where like you leave them at like maybe 6 or 8 and you drop a smite on 7 and that's GG. So like it's not just necessarily the control matchup. Sometimes like those mid-turn decks that are looking to flip the board can still struggle against a Mr. Smite coming down.
Yeah. I've seen people messing around like post Smite nerf with stuff like Okani and Lotheb, and even like going back to Leroy, which like none of it which has felt super impactful when played against me. And so I don't know, I'm kind of glad that Smite is still good because all those other options kind of look like trash. But also Pirate could have probably afford to be knocked down a peg, so maybe I'm not super glad to see that.
Yeah, I think it's like this a really nice, side effect, obviously. Like a nerf that wasn't targeted at Wild, but happened to coincidentally address sort of the most popular, well, aside from Big Shaman, but before that, the most popular and powerful deck in the format. And I do think it does give a little bit of window for Reno decks to stabilize. It's the same mana cost previously as Reno, so like sometimes that'd be sort of competing forces, where the opponent could like coin Smite and kill you before you could Reno. So that's kind of nice as well. I just think that extra turn is going to be, feel a lot better, I think, for some of those late game decks.
Yep. All right, now let's get to the big one. Let's talk about Lightning Bloom, the absolute gutting of this card. So let's start with the dev comment first. So as we tracked gameplay following the mini set, we noticed concerns about game experiences in Wild, particularly when it came to big shaman decks. These decks can sometimes ramp out big threats very early, which can make games feel like non-games. We quickly identified Lightning Bloom as the card which was creating the most problems for the format, both in the short term and long term, so we're making an aggressive adjustment. An aggressive adjustment it was. They kind of killed this card. It does not seem like a very good card post patch. And so obviously this was targeted at Big Shaman so that people weren't going turn 1 Ancestor Skull, turn 1 Muck Morphers, and things like that. But happy side effect, it also kind of slows down the really gross Druid early game high rolls of like turn 1 Guff or turn 1 Twig into Sphere. And so I don't know about you guys, but I am so freaking happy to see this card get nerfed.
Yeah. No, me too. This is in the fabled lost episode that we had last week. This is where a lot of our ire was directed, was at Big Shaman and in particular Lightning Bloom. This has been a nerf that has been like kicked around for years, it feels like, with almost since Lightning Bloom was released. It feels like people have been talking about nerfing it to refresh crystals, and I'm like, no, that's not necessary. It's fine. Leave it as is. I came around quickly as soon as Big Shaman started doing the Big Shaman things, and I'm glad that they addressed it pretty quickly because, like, we discussed this again last week, but Big Shaman was a pretty solid deck, probably underplayed prior to Neptulon existing, but as soon as Neptulon started coming out pretty consistently on turn 1 or 2, ending games, like, it was a problem. Like, I take a little bit of issue with the sometimes in the dev comment there with ramping out early threats and sometimes making things feel like non-games, because there are a lot of non-games when like almost never before when it came to Big Shaman. It felt like a very consistent and powerful version of something like a Steel or Souls Warlock, or even a much faster Darkest Hour Warlock, where it's just like, oh, this game's decided on turn 1, like, legitimately. And that's just not a real fun way to play Hearthstone, and this solves that problem completely. I'd say it's still, like, okay in some circumstances. Like, it's probably worth playing in Frog Shaman still, because you want to play the Frog, play the Bloom. You're not, like, you're spending mana anyway. You're not looking to get above a certain number of mana crystals in that type of deck. Same thing, I played a little bit of like an Auctioneer Druid, and it was just like fine there. So if you're not looking to get like above a certain number of mana early, then this card is still fine. And it really moves it like in line with a card like Mana Biscuit, which is probably where it should be. So like, this is the power level of the card, maybe as it should have been, and maybe I've been wrong all this time. Because, like they said, it does create complications for the future, and Big Shaman was a clear indicator of that.
Yeah, I love that we got this change so much, and it didn't even quite hit me. Like, obviously, I wanted to change to Big Shaman, and I was looking forward to it. And I thought Bloom was probably like the best candidate to nerf. It's you're never quite sure what they want to do when it comes to Wild, like whether they want to avoid touching a certain card due to like nostalgia, or are they trying to like it's always a bit of a fringe case with that, or can be complicated. But I think Bloom far and away the best change they could have done. It kind of dawned on me after we got the news, like how beneficial this is as well for just Druid as well. Just like we're not gonna get twigged on one anymore, you know, like this, like things like that. It just does take away, not just in Big Shaman, but in multiple archetypes, a lot of the potential scam non-games that we've seen a lot of the time in Wild recently. And so I'm just really, really happy with this change. Like, I'm happy that this card isn't going to be cheating and scamming games the way it was previously. So, yeah, really, really great.
Yeah. All right. So, to recap on everything, we did actually have a bunch of nerfs that did affect Wild, not just Bloom, even though that was the one directly targeted for the format. So, I know Corb wanted to touch back on this. I am going to read the dev comments of just the balance patch in general. Where roughly half of the changes in this patch are balance motivated and intended to target win rates of Control Warrior and Felt Demon Hunter directly. The rest of the changes in this patch are not primarily motivated by power level, but are instead focused on improving the play against experience of some of the more polarizing cards in the game. So I know, Corb, you wanted to kind of continue on that if you wanted to just take it from here.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the discourse around this patch, and to be fair, it was like a very aggressive patch, right? Like people weren't quite sure whether we were even going to get a patch for standard, whether there was going to be like a couple changes for Warrior and then everything else was left off, and then they went for this like pretty aggressive like patch and kind of targeted a lot of the scammy non-gamey stuff and just did a pretty widespread thing. However, a lot of the discussion around it has been due to the framing of what Aleko. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, sorry, but
it's Aleko like Gecko.
Aleko like Gecko. Okay, Aleko, who's the new basically like front face of the the final design team who does all the balance changing and stuff. Splitting up the nerfs as, hey, these are power outliers and these are feels, kind of got a lot of people mad. And I think it was just because of how easy it is to sort of piggyback off that. It was the very explicit splitting of the balance patch into these two types of categories. But it doesn't actually mean anything's changed, guys. Like, they've been doing nerfs for quote-unquote feels for literally years. The fact that Carriel is a quote-unquote feels nerf really does show you just sort of like how strong a card has to be considered a power outlier. If Carriel is not a power outlier and is more for feels related reasons, then I think you can go back to a whole bunch of previous nerfs and kind of look at other changes that were done purely for quote unquote feels. Guff is a card as well, which they've said if they were going to nerf, it wouldn't be due to a power outlier reason. But we all know how Guff seems. So feels nerfs are like something that I've been doing for years. It doesn't indicate any sort of change. It doesn't really indicate that this is some sweeping difference in philosophy from previous nerfs. It's just kind of poisoned a little bit of the conversation, I think, around the balance patch when everything is kind of same as usual.
Yeah, I think that's for two reasons. Twitter, first of all, isn't great for conveying nuance, which there is a lot of nuance here. They're not like two separate categories. There's overlap between these two things. And also Twitter or the internet in general, is bad at reading and recognizing nuance when they're reading something. So like the receiving end of it is also, no matter where you place that information, people are going to get upset over it. But like, people wount have negative feelings about cards if they weren't also powerful, right? Like maybe Ticketus and Immolate aside, for the most part, like part of the reason why a card feels bad to play against is because it is a strong card that does something strong against you, right? So there's again overlap between those two, and it's not just this like strict dichotomy between we nerf this card because it feels bad to play against. It's also just a very powerful card. I think that's a good point, that like it just goes to show how like high of a standard it is for what would require like a strict power level nerf. Like I don't know that many people really considered Tidal Revenant like a frustrating card to play against in standard. Like, yeah, it's powerful, but like I feel like the 5 damage is doing a lot of the heavy lifting on that card over the armor gain, ignoring the shield shatter, synergy associated with that. But like, I don't know, like it seems like it seems silly to get upset about like more information coming out of the dev team to me. Like, you want them to be candid, you want them to be forthcoming with this type of information. You don't, and like jumping on them because you either disagree or misread with what they were or misinterpreted what was being said seems kind of silly to me, because I think all of these have appeared to be very healthy changes for the metagame of both formats, and I think the results indicate that they were pretty healthy changes for the metagame of both formats. Like, a lot of these were obviously aimed at standard, and standard, the seems a lot more balanced than than it was, than it has been in quite some time. Like the win rates for all classes are, very, very similar. It's I don't know. It seems bizarre to me, but then again, I've never been one for like an internet mob.
One of the biggest reactions I saw were people saying, because you delineated this as a feels nerf, like what about all these other cards that I think feel really bad to play against? And I think that was maybe a little bit of a Pandora's box that they opened with the how they framed that and phrased it. But I also agree with the comments that you guys have made with, like, they've always done this. And so, like, the fact that people are, like, very surprised as to, like, why are you doing feels-based nerfs now? And it's like, that's not what they've done.
Yeah, the like everything all adds up to play experience, right? Like Roffle said, like power level is about feels. Like how often you see something, how popular it is, how strong it is, and then the actual like effect on the card and how it changes the game. Everything just adds up to the same thing, which is like how it changes how I experience the game when I press the play button and my opponent does things and I do things. And it all sort of adds up together. So, it's just like one piece of the puzzle, and some cards that just have a quote unquote like more toxic or a sort of mechanic that they don't approve of as much, and so like they don't have to be as powerful to necessarily warrant a change. But it is kind of just funny to me because they could have nerfed Carriel and just like not split it up as this like in these categories on Twitter. And if the dev comment was just, Carriel is creating too tight of a window in the end game, and we want to give players more of a chance to sort of get under Carriel before it kind of creates this end game window getting shut. Like whatever. They could have just like said that and it would have been totally fine. Like nobody would have blinked their eye and said like, oh my god, I can't believe they nerfed Carriel. Like how could they? But just because they have said explicitly, it's a quote unquote feels change, I think it's just it gets people mad who a lot of times want to be mad. Like people looking for reasons to sort of find quote unquote inconsistencies and BS and like anything that's sort of subjective in the devs comments. But the thing is, all balance changes are quote unquote subjective. There's no like objective measure to say how exactly are we supposed to make the game better. It's just they use all the information and then they go from there. So it is what it is.
Yeah, there's a really good Ixar tweet that he like always repeats every time there's these massive balance patches, and I can't specifically remember it, but it's like anything that they'd make changes to, right, balance wise, is specifically because of nerfs anyways, right? The power level and things play into the feels of playing against that card, where it feels very hopeless to play against something that's extremely strong, and so therefore they'll address it. And I've been searching for it for the past 2 or 3 minutes, and so I can't find it, so I feel really bad. But there's an Ixar tweet that he always posts every time that somebody asks him about these nerfs, and it's like, does it make the format more fun? It's kind of the gist of the tweet,
the goal,
right?
Exactly.
The goal is to make the format that you're playing more fun, and if the nerfs and buffs do that, then that's a successful balance patch, right? And yeah, I don't think we need to dive too much more deeply on this, because I think the balance patch was a success in both formats. And so I do want to talk a little bit about how the format's kind of shaping up here in the early days for the last little part of our episode this week. And so I just want to kind of open the floor to you guys. I've only played Hearthstone for a couple of days post-patch, so I don't have the most experience here. So I'll kind of open it up to you guys of like, what have you guys been playing? What feels really strong? What are the contenders for some of the best decks in the format?
Yeah, I think it's really very simple to determine what the best decks in the format are. You look to what the format was before the mini set came out, and like that's essentially where we're playing right now. Like we talked about again, I keep referencing last week's episode that nobody knows what we're talking about, but last week I made the fantastic point that like the big disruptor in the metagame was Big Shaman. That was pushing a lot of things out of the format that were here previously because of the fact that it just generated non-games. So like it was even starting to stifle a little bit of Pirate Rogue just because if you get a Scrapyard Colossus down on turn 1, you win that game. Or if you get a Neptulon down on turn 1, you win that game. So like, you know, that would created a very, very narrow window of or opening for very, very few decks. Things like Reno Paladin were no longer playable because you like how do you answer that as a Reno Paladin? So I made the point that if you nerf Big Shaman, which we're hoping and eventually got, that opens things back up and probably puts us back to where we were before. Because if you think about what the mini set gave us, basically just Neptulon, right? Like, and the only deck that was using Neptulon was Big Shaman. So it's like not much has really changed. Pirate Rogue is still a good deck. It lost a little bit in Mr. Smite, but like as Corb said, it's still a reasonably high performing card in a deck that was, still has 29 other good cards and 2 copies of Swordfish and ways to tutor the Swordfish. So it's like that's still going to be a good deck. It's still probably going to be the best deck. Um, One thing that I have been a little bit surprised by is I'm officially a Copper Hunter believer after today. I played it a little bit myself, and that deck does some silly things. If you can hit a Tundra Rhino or a Hydra Ladon with your fairly recently buffed Harpoon Gun, you can get a lot of damage to face. You also have an essentially infinite board clear if you play those two together, which I've done a few times and it feels good. I don't know how strong the deck is, but it feels pretty good into Pirate Rogue, which is a good indicator of if that's the most popular deck, being good into the best deck and having a chance against other things is not bad. So aside from that, I think that's the only real deck that I've seen much rise in popularity or prominence, and like there aren't any new cards in that because the mini set brought some nice support tools, but not really anything super powerful like we've had in the past, other than again Neptulon coming down on turn 1, which is no longer a legitimate threat. So unless I'm completely missing something that was super strong out of the mini set, like it didn't shake things up too much. It just kind of added to existing archetypes and gave a small amount of support to a few of those. But for the most part, I think we're just back where we were after the expansion started to settle, but before the mini set was released.
Yeah, back where we were with the tiniest of bumps to Rogue and then Druid, and like that's kind of it. But sometimes those little tiny bumps can be meaningful, right? Like if Rogue drops in 5 to 10, like 5% popularity, that can change things slightly. I don't know. I think that there are probably a lot of decks in the format that haven't been fully explored right now. Whether it is the Copper Beast Hunter that Roffle was talking about, but I think there are other things that have popped up recently that have been more promising than I would have initially guessed. Like I think Big Paladin is a deck that might actually be quite solid right now. I've been doing really well with Inner Fire Priest. Like recently, so that's the deck that I've been playing. That's been really, really fun to go back to that archetype even after the Drekthar nerf. It's very satisfying playing Handmaiden in that deck. So I don't know. I think that there are like a few things that we should be trying, and it does feel like the format probably has a little bit more breathing room than it did, just a tiny bit. And right now, I'm really not sure like how the whole meta is gonna break. I think there's a little bit up in the air. It has only been a few days, but I'm kind of looking forward to exploring things because, I think the bloom change, not just for the Big Shaman, but just for everything in general, and the Smite change does alleviate, some of the constraints that were being placed in other decks.
Yeah, I will say, in my early experience, it has felt like Pirate Rogue is still probably going to be the barometer for like.
Probably is.
Yeah.
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 I think that was to be expected though.
Yeah.
Like it didn't get hit that hard, and it was so much of a power outlier prior to it that like of course it's still good.
Yeah. So I think Pirate Rogue is probably the deck that you should probably be building your deck around. Make sure you have a way to survive against that, or honestly concede that matchup and win literally everything else. But outside of that, I guess, can I intrigue you guys? You said some big paladin. Can I intrigue you in some big priest with Neptulon,
Well,
with Illuminate,
Ruffle's
doing some turn 2,
Ruffle's the
turn
big
3
priest
shadow
guy.
essence? Yeah.
So we need to go to the big priest king, the main over here, Ruffle.
Yeah. I saw it popping up quite a bit during the Big Shaman metagame as like a response to Big Shaman, right? Because it's, you know, a way that you can beat Big Shaman is prevent the Neptulon from going face is set up layers of taunts, but or have the second Neptulon, which is, you know, Big Priest is always going to have the second Neptulon because it doesn't pop off on turn 1. Turn 2 is the absolute earliest. I did see some lists running just Blood of Gahoon and Neptulon, and like maybe that's the way to build the deck. You're gonna give up quite a bit into Rogue, but like an early Blood of Gahoon is already going to be good enough. I don't know. I didn't play a lot of it, but I had a little bit more faith in Big Paladin when I was playing that than Big Priest, just because historically, you know, Big Priest folds to aggro, and we haven't really had many aggro decks that are as fast and as consistently fast as Pirate Rogue. So I would be skeptical, because if you're not running Scrapyard Colossus, which in that build that's probably too many minions, or you're going to start getting hands back with your Spellstones in important matchups where you don't want that to happen. That doesn't feel good. So like, if we're talking about specifically the Pirate Rogue matchup, I think we can safely assume that Big Priest was really bad into Pirate Rogue prior to the changes. Otherwise, we would have seen it popping up, because like it got Illuminate, which is a, you know, an early way to cheat out those minions, which it needs against Pirate Rogue. If in earlier builds of Big Priest it was struggling in a Pirate Rogue metagame, I don't think that the Neptulon build, which is going to be worse into that deck, is going to be viable in a Pirate Rogue world. So I would be skeptical. Honestly, like at least you know, at least Big Paladin can run a, you know, good assortment of minions. Like even the Templar Captain or whatever its name is pretty good into Rogue, because if you duel it out, you get 2 taunts immediately. If you just play it for cheap, you get a big body that rushes. Like you're removing like 3 things if you duel it out. You're removing 2 things and creating a taunt if you just play it from hand. So it seems a little bit better. But like one of the big things about Big Paladin was that it was so good into Big Shaman, because you could remove threats from their deck with duel and clear them immediately. And then like Big Shaman did run out of threats. So I don't know. I don't know how good Big Paladin is in a Big Shamanless world, but I trust Corb's take on that, because I haven't played it myself.
I'm gonna have to try some of this Big Paladin Corb keeps talking up. Yeah, we got to see if he's actually onto something here. I do want to say the one thing that I've noticed in my short time back playing the format here is Reno decks have come back out in full force post Big Shaman ban, or nerf, I guess, not ban, but like I've seen so much Reno Shaman, Reno Druid, Reno Paladin. I've even seen stuff like Reno Evenlocks coming back a little bit. They don't seem insanely powerful, but they do seem like they win enough to climb. And we talked about this last week, where it kind of feels like Reno is the barometer, the canary in the coal mine, where if like Reno decks aren't able to be semi-viable, something might be going on in the format that we want to take a look at. And it does kind of seem like Reno decks are back and at least playable again.
I think the Reno decks are a good barometer for the player base's perception of the metagame. If people are able to queue up a Reno deck and not just get absolutely stomped by what we were seeing in a Big Shaman world, where it was basically Big Shaman, Pirate Rogue, and a whole lot of fast combos, and like that is a just nightmare for Reno decks, where maybe they can beat Pirate Rogue, but they're not beating any of those other 2 decks. Like you know, you're maybe like a 55-45 or 60-40 favored into Pirate Rogue if you build your deck like hyper anti-aggro. But then if you do that, you have absolutely no chance against those other decks. So yeah, I think that going back to the feels conversation, I think that Reno decks in general are a good, like the popularity of them are like a good indicator for how people are going to feel about the meta game, and things have opened up quite a bit more since the nerfs. And yeah, it's not. I haven't seen a whole lot of Reno decks myself, but it's not a surprise that they would be coming back because you know maybe you build it to answer a pirate rogue now, and that's why they're cropping up.
All right. So I also want to mention Tempest Storm Report has come out, really, really early impressions of the new format. So we're not going to dive into the tier list or the rankings or anything like that, but I just wanted to mention it as a resource for deck list for anybody that's looking out for stuff to play in the new patch. We'll drop that down in the description. And I guess I want to kind of leave off the conversation here with, are you guys having fun in the new patch? You guys, I guess that's always the big thing. I know, Corb, you're back to Wild. I know you took a couple weeks off of Wild to play some Standard and some Duels. Just generally to both of you guys, do you think the patch has, I mean, the patch has improved Wild? Are you guys having a lot more fun in it? I guess is my question.
Yeah, I was having a lot of fun up until this morning when I got strong-armed by my YouTube comments into playing this really atrocious weapon warrior deck that made me completely miserable. But once I stopped playing that, I was having fun again because I started playing Copper Hunter, and that deck's really sweet. So, the format, I made this point again last week, where I think we were all enjoying the format quite a bit more in early to mid Voyage to the Sunken City. Thing like Pirate Rogue again, really strong deck, but like it feels like you can beat it. You don't feel quite as helpless against it necessarily as you did into some of the quest lines when they are super strong. Like you don't have this you have inevitability coming at you, but you feel like you can fight against it, and it's not like a guaranteed just one card win condition like those are. So it feels like the options were open, and that's why I was so agitated about like the prominence, the rise in prominence of Big Shaman, is because it took that away. And I started feeling very helpless into the Big Shaman metagame. So I don't think it's just the contrast, because I was enjoying things before the mini set. I think I don't know, I'm okay in a world where Pirate Rogue is the best deck. I'm like, yeah, I can fight Pirate Rogue. I feel like I have a chance. I know what I need to do to beat that. It's not just relentless pressure like Pirate Warrior. It's not, relentless pressure like, well, it is a relentless pressure, but it's not like over the course of a game, relentless pressure, right? They run out of resources eventually, unless they hit the secret passages. But they run out of resources eventually, and so you can theoretically play an attrition game plan against them. Whereas that's not something that's realistic or plausible into especially a deck like Quest Warrior. So I feel like just that opens up more options and makes me feel, I don't know, like I don't know. I enjoy the format. I enjoyed it prior to the mini set, and I'm happy to go back to that world and like you guys said, in a world where Pirate Rogue is maybe half step slower or quarter step slower, and where Druid is also a bit slower as well. So I think that, yeah, it's just like, it's a new and improved version of what we had, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's better, right? Like if we're giving a grade, I would have given like the Big Shaman meta like a D- or an F. Like it was one of the worst ones that I really remember playing in, and I obviously just noped out of that and took a couple weeks off. And for me, like, it's all personal preference. It's like a C plus, like a B minus. Like, I don't know, like it's a pass, right? Like that's currently how I feel about the format. Like it's fine, and that's hell of a lot better than where it was. We're not flunking out with this meta, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, you guys listening to the podcast, let us know down in the comments how you guys are feeling about the meta. Let us know what you're trying, what you think is the best, all that kind of good stuff. And I have one last question for you guys before we wrap up this week's episode. Okay, this was a prediction question. There are no right or wrong answers. Okay, what do you think the next deck that the Wild community is going to complain about and petition to be nerfed is going to be?
Well, I mean, they're already doing it. Like they didn't stop. But I think that the the most apparent ones or most likely candidates are probably Quest Mage and Mind Rogue. But I'm saying that because those are the most popular complaints that I see in the format. Fast combo is in the form of Mind Rogue is always kind of yucky. Nobody likes that. I think people tend to overestimate just because like the memory of losing to your opponent's hand on turn 4 is really really memorable, and that sticks with people for a while. The one thing that I meant to talk about with the feels versus power conversation is the feel of a deck card archetype dramatically inflates a player's impression of its power level. And so if you have a deck like Mind Rogue, people are going to overestimate how good it is. And I think in the same way, like Quest Mage feels very bad to play against, and I think people inflate its power level as well. I think they're both very good decks, but like I don't think that they're as strong as a Pirate Rogue, for instance. And I mean, it helps that Pirate Rogue probably beats both of those decks, but I think that like the feeling that both of those decks give really inflates players' perception of them, and you couple that with the fact that like at high legend, players don't play a whole lot of aggro, so like those decks can escape one of their worst matchups. And like if you see a lot of low numbers next to those types of decks on deck aggregation sites, you're going to assume that that's the best deck, or those are the best decks in the format, and again inflate them. And so I think that those are the two likely candidates for nerf calls.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Reddit, the Wild Hearthstone subreddit, is most often going to be complaining about Pirate Rogue, and I think that the highly engaged like Twitch viewers and like writers of meta reports and streamers and things are gonna probably mostly complain about Quest Mage. Those are the two differences, I think.
Yeah, I think I'd put my money on Quest Mage as well. That or Mind Rogue, because I know Mind Rogue is also a standard deck. That I've seen a couple of I don't know how good this card is. I've seen some complaining about Mind Rogue, so maybe my money should actually be on Mind Rogue because it's a standard deck.
It's pretty toxic. Like I think I don't know if like Wild's gonna be carrying the weight of that one. I think standard communities might get that stuff nerfed pretty quickly by itself.
I think you underestimate with the less engaged audience how much those complaints in standard carry over to Wild as well. So
Okay, yeah.
I think that's like it's almost like a two-front attack. Like, yeah, I think Mind Rogue is going to be a very popular complaint, and I don't think it matters which format it is, because like that starts to blur together for some portion of the player base.
Yeah. All right. Also, let us know down in the comments what deck you hate and want to see nerf next. All right.
Oh, come on, man. Let's get positive. What are we doing here? Come on.
Hey, you gotta come on. Do we play Wild? It's gotta be a little bit of both. All right. Appreciate everybody listening to the episode all the way through. Hope you guys enjoyed. I am very much enjoying Hearthstone a lot more post patch. Hope you guys are too. Roffle and Corb, thanks for joining me. Sorry about last week where we sat here and recorded an episode and then we didn't release it. But I appreciate you guys still sticking with me to record the 97th and a half episode, I guess, of the State of Wild. Let the people know where they can find you and your content.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitch and YouTube at Roffle, and on Twitter at RoffleHS.
You can always find me at Corbett on Twitch and at Corbettgames on YouTube and Twitter.
Yep, you guys can find me at Get Me Out on all those platforms as well. Appreciate all of you guys listening all the way to the end. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we will see you guys again next time. Later.